Welcome to the peak performance video for the NT300 3 horsepower equivalent electric outboard motor. This video is going to cover all the variables that go into powering the motor and the way you use it to achieve the best performance on your watercraft. The first performance consideration you'll need to make is your power source for the NT300. Newport offers Bluetooth-enabled lithium iron phosphate batteries, and this motor takes the 36 volt 30 amp hour version of that or 36 volt 40 amp hour version of that. You can also wire two 36 volt batteries in parallel to get a bigger amp hour and longer run time. So the nice thing about the lithium iron phosphate batteries is they're about half the weight and provide about twice the power. So if weight is a critical factor for you on your watercraft, I definitely recommend looking into that route. If you choose to run the motor off of a 36 volt deep cycle battery, simply select the deep cycle mode on the top of the motor. Shaft lengths on the NT300 motor are standard and fixed, but you have a tilt feature on the motor depending on how your boat's postured in the water that you'll need to consider for best performance. It's important to have a friend keep an eye on the posture of your vessel as you're on the water. You want the load as balanced as possible. In order to run more level with your watercraft, you may have to adjust the tilt. To adjust the motor's tilt, simply remove this D-ring, pull this pin out, and insert it into a different hole. As you can see, when I move up to the second notch, the motor runs with a little bit of tilt. You can go all the way up as high as this last hole, which is a more rare use case, but it does give you the option to really trim that motor up quite a bit. I always recommend starting with the motor trimmed to the lowest setting. So I'll select that bottom hole, insert the pin, and insert the D-ring. That's always going to be a good starting point. The other feature you'll need to consider is the use of the reverse lockout. So if you're in deep open water, I recommend pushing that down and locking the motor into the down position. If you need the motor to kick up, if you're in tannic water with submerged obstacles, click that lever up and leave it like that. In forward propulsion, the motor will always be forced into the down position. Connecting to the motor to the power source simply involves joining the two halves of the quick disconnect plug. It's critical before every time on the water, you select the appropriate power mode between deep cycle or lithium. Insert the key and then power up the motor. You do want to run those checks to ensure that you've got full power and all the way down to as low as 5% or lower throttle in either direction. A balanced load for a level watercraft is important, but one key performance attribute is the Newport BMS app. Performance-wise, the big thing that I get out of connecting my Newport BMS in the battery to the app is my monitoring of the state of charge as well as the current amp draw. By monitoring those two variables on the app, I can figure out the optimal throttle percentage for the maximum amount of range. Now, I think that about 40% throttle is a sweet spot for most small vessels with this NT300 motor. It allows you to achieve a pretty good speed at an optimal RPM range. But depending on the weight and the bow entry of your watercraft, as well as the conditions, you may want to adjust a little bit. If you have a fairly long run in from your fishing spot and you've got plenty of charge left, you can crank that throttle up and get up to that highest end speed possible for your watercraft and the NT300. The best way to get the most accurate state of charge readout is to refresh the connection to the battery's BMS. To do that, simply press the button on the top right of the screen on the app, search devices, and reconnect to the battery. This takes about 15 seconds, and I recommend doing it every half hour when you're first getting familiar with the motor and the battery. Since I've already developed a pretty good understanding of how far my NT300 can go off the 36 volt 40 amp hour battery that I run it with, I only monitor the state of charge and refresh the battery connection about once an hour. I feel like that's enough for me to get a pretty clear understanding of how the conditions that day are affecting my run time. The watercraft and the motor and the battery are all constants. So the one thing that changes a little bit day to day is the conditions. So I'll just want to keep an eye on my state of charge periodically throughout the day and see where I'm at. The Newport BMS app monitors a bunch of different things, but the two most critical readouts that I'm monitoring when I'm on the water are state of charge and current amp draw. That's going to give you an idea of where that sweet spot is with your vessel, depending on the conditions. The other thing that I'm going to keep an eye on my fish finder screen is the speed that I'm traveling at. That'll allow me to use amp draw in combination with speed to kind of dial in where that most optimal RPM range is, and then I'm going to refresh the battery app every time I need to look at my state of charge. It's not critical to constantly monitor the state of charge, but that is the biggest icon on the app and the biggest, most critical readout. Obviously, you need to make sure that you've got enough battery power to go to your destination and return back to the launch safely with a little power to spare. The system is straightforward and simple. I hope you've used the tips provided in this video to help you get the best performance out of your watercraft, battery and motor. The way forward is electric.